Thank you. Chris Tanasi, would you like to comment?
I'm over here shaking my head, Judge Tindill. I'm agreeing with a lot of what you said. So my name is Chris. I am a CASA volunteer, but in my previous life, I worked for DCF for over 35 years. So I began my career at DCF in the mid 1980s, around 85, 86. And so I'm thinking, as you're kind of talking about the Thurman case, I'm thinking back to those days and the way in which, not proud of it actually, of the way that I was trained. I will say what I want to say before I go way, way back is that I do think that the child welfare system in Connecticut, particularly DCF, has evolved. There's always more work to do. I said that when I worked there. I say it now from the outside, looking in. But when I think back to my practice back in the early 80s, I'm sorry, the late 80s, early 90s in the field, we really did approach the work from the perspective of, why isn't she, we essentially blamed the victim, right? We blamed, in most instances, it was the mother, right? And what is the worst thing you can do in those situations when a woman is probably fighting for her life and fighting to protect her kids, is we remove them. Right? I mean, when I think about that and I think about what we thought we were doing and we thought we were doing the right thing. I think as a system, as I said, I do think that over the years, DCF evolved and generally, any evolution in a child welfare system, in my experience, is the result of some tragic situation which shines a light on the areas of our practice that we either missed or were not, paying attention to. And I think, and forgive me, after being there for that many years, I forget what years things happened. But somewhere along the way, I think as a system, we began to realize the damage that we were doing. And there is a gentleman who you might be familiar with. He was actually doing a lot of work in Connecticut, Dave Mandel, who has the Safe and Together model. And so I think in my experience, somewhere along the way, he was someone who was sort of shouting from the rafters, like, you cannot ignore these men
It's
again.
because he's a man. We were like,
Oh my
woo!
God, Dave,
Like
what do
he
you
had to
think?
fight and scrap and
Yeah,
get his
no,
way.
you're right. And initially, we would say, what is he talking about? Like, what do you mean? You've got to pay attention to, and I apologize if I'm not using probably, I've been out of the agency for only 3 years, but I know that language evolves, but we would refer to them as perpetrators or batterers, right? And so, I do think he was one who really, began to shine the light on how we should approach and treat and interact with men in those situations, the batterers, right? Not making excuses and not certainly not putting any family at risk. But anyway, and again, and then I think as the years progressed, we again, as a result of a tragic situation, a tragic case, the agency realized that we needed staff who had a specialty focus in this area. And just for the other advocates, if you are not aware, that every DCF office in the state has staff on staff employees who are they call them IPV specialists, intimate partner violence specialists, who will work with the caseworkers. They go out and meet with families, they go out and meet with moms, they meet with dads, they meet with with the perpetrators. And I think, Judge Tyndall, what you were saying towards the end of your comments, and I was shaking my head, is that I do remember the days when the police were called, and you said the words, you were saying the words as I was saying them, somebody's getting arrested. Like That's just how it went down. Like if the police were coming out, and so that was always a tough kind of a situation, I think, for just for child protection workers, like when the police got involved, and really what it did to the moms in those situations. They would be afraid to call. I mean, I think it's a very nuanced kind of a thing. But but the focus on fathers, and again, I'm using father, I'm speaking from a specific like child welfare lens, right? And we're working with families who we get involved with, moms and dads. I do think the evolution of the agency around the inclusion of fathers in the work, which we were a very mother-centric system. Like there were days, again, way back when I first started, we didn't even ask about fathers. We didn't even, what we did do, those were back in the days of what used to be called AFDC, which is your, assistants, we were taught to look around the house to, if a mom was receiving, back in the day AFDC, but a financial assistance from the state, because dads weren't supposed to be in the house, and so everybody was checking to see who was there. But I think where the agency is now is the inclusion of fathers in the work. Really, to your point, you cannot focus on healing a family or helping a family in where IPV is an issue without talking about, for those children, the father. Good, bad, whatever, right? Safety always comes first, right? You always have to, I'm speaking from the perspective of child welfare now. You always have to first and foremost think about safety for the family, for the mother, for the children. But I do not think it's acceptable anymore in practice in these situations for the child welfare system to just ignore fathers or to put them in a box and say, you are. And I was also what you were saying about, women, victims, they don't always want that perpetrator or that the father, again, I'm using father or partner, to be in jail or to be out of the house. That brings a whole host of other problems, not to mention financial support, relationships with children. It's easy for us, I think, and had always been easy for us to just say, get him out, get him out, get rid of him, don't ever talk to him, don't ever let him see your kids, don't, that's not realistic. It's just not realistic.
When you say realistic, I think back, two things come to mind. When I was a prosecutor, there was a woman who was a victim in one of my cases. And again, I was in a specialized domestic violence court. So the only cases I
Oh,
did
wow.
in this particular unit, the judges were specially trained, the public defenders were specially trained, the prosecutors were specially trained. This is in the early 90s. Florida, Miami, was ahead of the curve in terms of domestic violence prosecutions. I had a woman say to me when I'm prepping her for our trial, because he wasn't taking any offers, we're going to go to trial, you're going to be asked questions. And she said, uh, if he goes to jail for these 5 years or however long I was asking for, she said, are we coming to your house to eat, me and my kids? And I'm thinking, no, you're not coming to my house. Like my only focus was my prosecution. And it was when I began to think from their perspective about, here's how you can help me. It's when I began to think about what she wanted was the abuse to stop. She didn't necessarily want him to go away for a long period of time. Um, and then I just forgot my second point. It'll come back to me. But it's what I'm referring to when I say that that systems are limited. You were trained that safety meant a mother who was allowing a child to be exposed to a father who was physically abusive or emotionally abusive. Your job, your manual said, take that kid away if she's not going to do X, Y, and Z. So you were limited to what the rules were. that's an example of the ill-advised, policies that I'm referring to where, Chris's job was to make sure that kid got removed. And once that mother lost the child because she wasn't protecting her children, then things started to snowball, right? But now we know a couple of things. We know more about how men become batterers, perpetrators, and we know more about the effect of not doing something like a safe and together model or a fatherhood for change by excluding literally one half of the equation and only addressing that, the victim side of it. We know what that does to children, and figuring out ways to address the trauma, to have the violence stop, to get the family the resources they need. I also want to make just a comment about the pervasiveness of domestic violence. In my experience, people who are wealthier or famous or have more of a public uh, need to save more face are often the most silent. We think of it as being a problem for poor people or middle class people who don't. But I have had a number of personal experiences with cases of Gold Coast women in Greenwich and in Lower Fairfield County who absolutely could not have any of these systems involved. Nobody at the country club could know. This was this power couple that I have had that experience. So I believe that it is almost more pervasive and silent and unaddressed, the wealthier or the more publicly exposed the victim or the perpetrator is.
Thank you, Judge Tindill and Chris, for those very insightful observations. I want to just mention two things and then ask Tawanna to speak a bit more about her perspective and also what she has seen over the last decade or so in New Jersey. I imagine there's been some evolution there. So the two things we were talking about, prevention and men. There is a program aimed at young men, boys, called Coaching Boys into Men, that the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence has a staff person who, among other things, helps to disseminate this program across the state. They have a curriculum that, as the name suggests, that one is really aimed at boys, often involved in sports programs. And they can work with schools, with coaches, with captains of teams. And anyone here who's interested in that, I would encourage you to look that up at the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They have a kind of a counterpart that's aimed at young women to encourage them to speak up more and, support one another. And uh, I'm not as familiar with that, but the coaching boys into men is something that's been talked about for at least a couple of decades. I recall, when I was on the board of what was then Domestic Violence Services of Greater New Haven, and also Dwayne Jackson, who's in the group here, he and I have attended meetings in the New Haven area of what's called FELT, F-E-L-T, the Fatherhood Engagement Leadership Team, which is making an effort in this region and in other regions across the state with DCF and various partners to engage men and, hope that they will those who've already been involved in this violence will recognize they need to take responsibility for themselves and their families, and then also to really hold up as examples those men who, have never engaged in this in the first place, and those who have made great progress in addressing the issue. So I'll be quiet and ask Tawanna, please, to speak.
Thank you. And thank you both, Chris and Judge Tindill, for your comments and remarks as they were necessary, needed,